Hello, everyone. My name is Lionel Sandner, and I'm from Pembroke Publishers, and I'll be your host for tonight's webinar with our presenter, Kara Dymond. She'll be talking about her book, The Autism Lens. Before we get started, just a couple technical housekeeping thoughts. Most of you have found the chat, so if you have any questions during the session, please feel free to drop them into the chat there. I will monitor that chat, and then when Kara is done, we will have time for a question and answer, and we'll try to get through as many questions as we can in the time that we have allotted for that. So please feel free to drop them in there, and we'll make sure that they get brought forward at the end. If you have any technical issues, just start your chat with that, Lionel, and that'll sort of flag it for me, and I'll go sort of off to the side here and help you and get you organized as well. Also, this session is being recorded, and you will receive an email in about 24 hours from now with a link to that recording that you can pass on to colleagues and to others if you'd like to share this particular session with them as well. So with that, let's get started. And it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker today, Dr. Kara Dymond. Kara is an autism consultant, a researcher, and an educator who teaches children with autism. She also designs and delivers professional development on autism for teachers, and then bases their feedback about their classroom concerns as kind of a way of positioning the work that she does with them. In the summer, she somehow also finds time to be an instructor at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education at the University of Toronto, where she teaches a graduate course on mental health and special education. So she comes to us with a wealth of experience from a variety of different aspects, I guess, of education. And I know as I've gotten to know her over the last little while, as we've prepared for this session, I've realized that her brother who has autism, has played a big part of where she is here today. And in our session today, I know she's going to be referring to her book that's been published by Pembroke Publishers called The Autism Lens. And I think we're in for a treat of a lot of stories and personal experiences that we can tie back to our practice. And I think that's something we're looking for all the time. And so, Kara, it's great to have you here. I'm really looking forward to this evening's session with you. And so I'll pass the virtual mic over to you.
Thanks so much, Lionel. I'm really, really happy to be here and to have so many people here to participate in this. I am in my 10th year teaching a specialized program for autistic children who 4 days a week are integrated into the general classroom setting. And then they come to me 1 day a week for some social and self-regulatory supports. And I'm blessed to be able to work with them over 3 years. So during that time, I'm collaborating, obviously, with my students, with their families, and with their classroom teachers. And that level of collaboration has really helped me grow as an educator and gain practice and tips for practice. And that's the inspiration for this book. And the book combines some theory with practice, and it's grounded in the voices of my students. And throughout today's presentation, you will see art made by my students. And I also wanted to thank everyone for being here today. I know professional development can be overwhelming anytime. There's so many ideas. Where do you start? And it's especially overwhelming in COVID times. So thank you for being here. And I want to pass on some wisdom from a wonderful teacher I know who told me she always starts by making one small change to add to her practice. And I'll be very curious at the end of this to hear what resonated most with you. So the simplest way I can describe autism is a difference in brain wiring that leads to different ways of experiencing and processing the world. It's considered a developmental disability. And in learners like my students, their challenges are often masked by their average cognitive and language abilities. And it can be quite baffling for teachers when they encounter roadblocks because teachers can't see what's going on in the brains of our students. And that's something when I deliver PD, teachers are always very interested in learning about. Now, before I get into the lessons from my students, I want to introduce you to my brother, Danny. And he is one of my favorite human beings in the whole world. And I remember when we were growing up, when he was in school, he would go very easily into shutdown mode if anyone raised their voice, if they gave complex directions he just couldn't process, if the demands felt too overwhelming. But at home, I found that I could coax him to try things that were out of his comfort zone or maybe a little bit difficult for him, simply by giving him time to process, slowing things down, and of course, working in all his favorite Nintendo characters into whatever it was we were trying to do. And I'm so grateful to Danny because he gave me such a solid foundation to start out with as a teacher before I even knew I wanted to be a teacher. Now, when I discovered this was what I wanted to do, I was actually teaching a drama program for autistic children. And I had one of those aha moments that this was what I was supposed to be doing. And I enrolled in Teachers College, and it was really sad when I had to leave. But all of the students made me cards, and their teacher gave a lesson on how when we write a card to someone, we want it to reflect our relationship that we have with that person. And so they brainstormed what could go on cards, and she circulated around the room, and some of the students were drawing drama masks or theater stages. And then she came along to this student, and this remains one of my favorite cards of all time. And the teacher stopped for a moment. She noticed the city of Toronto in rubble and on fire, and she said, does Miss Dymond like fire-breathing dragons? And the artist responded, she likes good art. And he was absolutely right. One of the things I love about this is it is so unique. He wasn't constrained by what he thought he should do. He marched to his own drummer. And that's one of the things I love about working with these students. And it's a constant reminder to me to embrace their perspectives, try to see it their way, because it can broaden not only my own perspective, but it can really enrich the conversations and goings on in my classroom. One of the things I want you to understand is social communication is extremely difficult for our students. It's part of the diagnosis. And one of the reasons is they don't process social information the same way neurotypical people do. In fact, when they watch movies or real life interactions, studies have shown that their eye gaze is actually scattered. It's not attending to what would be considered the socially relevant information, like facial expression, body language, and the context. So they have a lot of difficulty reading people, predicting what they might be thinking and feeling. And because of that tendency to miss context cues, they don't intuitively pick up on all the hidden expectations that are embedded into pretty much everything that we do, all the things that guide our behavior, and we're just expected to know without anyone teaching us. So in my classroom, we spend a lot of time going over what hidden rules are, how they exist everywhere. And some examples of this would be, a hidden rule is that we don't greet our grandmother the same way we greet our principal. We greet them in different ways. A hidden rule is it's okay one day of the year to accept candy from strangers, but none of the others. And we don't always explain why. And one time I had a student ask me how my bowel movements were, and I had to say, they're great, but that's something that we don't talk about in casual conversation. That would be a conversation you have with your doctor or maybe your parents. And people don't teach us everything we need to know or are expected to do. And further complicating it is rules shift all the time with age, with different people in different settings. And that is really tough for autistic students because once they have learned a rule, they want to cling to it for dear life, which makes sense to me because in a world that is so wildly unpredictable to them, they want to have structure. They want to have ways to feel safe and in control. And so the lesson for us in this is we need to make things as predictable as we can. So in our classrooms, it's having routines, having visual schedules, explaining any changes that might be coming up in the day in advance when we can. And our expectations must be made as clear as possible. Last year, one of my students shared with me that when he was in kindergarten, every day he came home with a red frowny stamp. So frowny face, it was red. Every single day. He had no idea what he needed to do to get the green smiley face. And he's now in 6th grade and he still hates the color red. And so it's so much more helpful if we tell our students what we want them to do rather than just letting them know they're making mistakes. We need to give them the relevant information and set them up for success. Now, I also want to let you know we won't always get this right. About a decade ago, my brother Danny was going to a social group and they were headed to laser tag for the first time. And I thought I did a fantastic job of preparing him. We role played how to pay for the ticket. I showed pictures of the place. We went over the rules in advance. I explained how he would put on a pack that would vibrate and light up sometimes. And when I was driving him to go to laser tag for the first time, I looked over at him and he was biting his lip and he looked like he might burst into tears. And so I said, Danny, what's wrong? And he said, I don't want to get shot. And I had forgotten to tell him that they're not real lasers. So of course, I explained to him, I wouldn't have volunteered to go with you if I could possibly get shot too. No, I explained that would not happen, that a business would not exist if they shot all their patrons. And we made a deal. We made a deal to go in together for 10 minutes, stick together, and then if he wasn't comfortable, we would come out immediately, no questions asked. Fortunately, he loved it, and we've gone back since. But that taught me 3 things. We're going to get it wrong sometimes. So we try not to beat ourselves up about it. We learn from it. And secondly, what seems obvious to me might not be obvious to folks with autism. And thirdly, I think about what courage it took him to follow me inside with the level of anxiety that he had. And if we want our students to take chances and grow in our classrooms, trust is an essential ingredient. Our students also have difficulty problem-solving social responses. So other children learn very quickly how to adapt their responses to get the outcome that they want. And autistic children are not so practiced in this. So they might repeat an unsuccessful attempt to engage with a peer, such as grabbing that child's snack, or repeatedly telling their crush that they want to marry them, even though the nonverbal and verbal cues that are coming back to them are mostly negative. So they might miss the cues entirely, or they might not have the cognitive flexibility to be able to think of another way to do things. Or they might attempt to join a sports game, have a miserable time, and then vow to never try it again. And because they communicate differently than their neurotypical peers, they might not cushion their message to a peer in a socially acceptable package. Like the time I had a student who called another student a loser when he lost a game. So literally true, but didn't endear him to that classmate. And unfortunately, what that means is autistic children are often misinterpreted by people around them as being intentionally rude, and that is not the case at all. In fact, a new study this year found that when autistic folks communicate with other autistic folks, they have the same level of success as neurotypical people communicating with other neurotypicals. And it's when communicating across neurotypes that there's this communication breakdown, like a game of broken telephone. This gives us some direction. We want to communicate in a way that supports their understanding, as we would for students with hearing or vision impairments. So instead of thinking, oh, he should know this about a student, we should try and make the compassionate assumption that maybe they don't know. And I once had to explain to a 12-year-old student that there are some thoughts we can keep in our head. And his jaw dropped and he said, why has no one told me this before? And I think about that all the time because I imagine how much trouble I would get into if I didn't implicitly know that rule. I'd be in trouble all the time. And so we can help our students by monitoring their understanding of relationships and what's going on around them, and being a safe person they can ask questions to, and discussing and debriefing around any miscommunications to build their understanding. They're also very socially unsure, but they might not show it and they might not say it. The artist who drew this picture was very happy-go-lucky, and he seemed content most of the time, but this is how he felt on the inside. And it's easy as teachers to mistake a lack of engagement for lack of interest. But many of my students just want to avoid the humiliation of not being able to join, not knowing how to join, or being rejected by peers when they try. And some don't know all the hidden rules, so they might trail after a group and not realize there's too much distance between them and they're not part of the group. But others have adapted by taking out a book or art supplies to do something solitary and to feel comfortable. So that's a reminder to me all the time that just because they aren't necessarily getting into fights or looking upset doesn't mean they don't need help. And so we can encourage interactions in different ways. In class, you want to really structure any sort of group or peer partner interaction. Grouping peers with similar interests is great, and very brief think pair shares or mix and mingles where they know the topic and they can speak to that. And reviewing the hidden rules before any group tasks. I worked with a wonderful teacher who would say, how do you make a plan to do a project together? How do you share ideas? What happens if you disagree? And that benefits everybody in the room. Now, at recess, autistic students might need a break, and they might need breaks throughout the day, so interactions shouldn't be forced, but you can certainly encourage them, especially over that longer recess where there's time for a break and possible interactions, and they might be more willing to join if you've taught recess games at gym or DPA, so that everyone knows the rules, they know what to do. Help send them out with a plan. Who are they going to talk with? If your school is lucky enough to have recess equipment, and I know this year most schoolyards aren't allowing recess equipment, but when you can, sending them out with those things. Or at lunchtime, having a special interest club so they can find peers with similar interests, or a position volunteering at the office, the library, in kindergarten classrooms, again, with a peer, so there is that element of peer-to-peer interaction. Now, they also have sensory differences. And the way I kind of relate to this is I imagine I'm in an elevator and it's already packed, so I'm a little bit uncomfortable. And then someone gets on, they have very strong cologne, their bag hits the emergency alarm. So all of my senses are being stimulated, and not in a way that makes me feel calm. Now, our students with autism and our students with ADHD notice every piece of sensory information around them. They're not able to filter it out and make kind of a white noise. So some of the things my students have shared with me, if you look at this comic strip, this student does not like unpredictable touch. So she's okay with high fives, hugs, fist bumps, but she refers to touch as the devil. It makes her feel like she is on fire when she can't predict it. And I've had students tell me that they can actually see fluorescent light flicker 120 times per second, and they can hear the buzz of it. And sounds they aren't expecting can be extremely distressing and painful. So many students have heightened senses, and it could affect any one of their senses or multiple senses. But we also have students who might be undersensitive. So that might be the student who doesn't notice how their body is feeling on the first hot day of the year, and they're still wearing their winter coat, even though all of their classmates have dumped the coat on the lawn. So for us as teachers and educators, we need to think about how our environment is designed. Having a calming area that anyone can use is great, whether it's a couch, a tent, just a chair with a lava lamp, and reducing the visual clutter around. And prompting breaks. This is especially important if you are teaching virtually, because I've heard from many of my students that they're forgetting to take breaks. They're not paying attention to their bodies. And so give them the reminder. And in classrooms, I tell students all the time that their peers take breaks and they weren't aware. So they aren't aware peers might ask to go to the washroom, even when they don't actually need to use the washroom. It's a way of getting up and moving and getting a short break. Mindfulness throughout the day in many ways is great. I like to play music as a transitional tool in the morning, guided meditations, practicing breathing. And Shelley Murphy's Fostering Mindfulness is my go-to book. If you have your own classroom, I really recommend you get that. And free access sensory tools, which are easier to do in non-COVID years, but it could be anything from fidgets, a mind jar, which has sparkles that settle, and you can watch them and breathe with it until your thoughts settle as well. Having breathing exercise cards, and always teaching. If it's something like a squeeze ball, you want to teach the difference between tool and toy so that your class knows. This year, things like coloring sheets, which are very individual, are a good idea. And I've heard from some students that having one side of a strip of Velcro taped in or glued into their desk allows them to just get some sensory input with their fingers, keeps their hands busy, but in a way that is not distracting and allows them to have sensory input and move. Now, as anyone who knows an autistic person, or maybe you are autistic, there's a tendency to interpret language at face value. And this can be a really great thing. I don't know if anyone here has watched Love on the Spectrum yet, but it really made me start thinking that ghosting is a uniquely neurotypical phenomenon, because all of the autistic people going out on dates are very clear, I'm not interested in pursuing a romantic relationship with you. And wouldn't it be nice if everyone was that clear? So sometimes, however, their tendency of extreme truth-telling can get them into trouble. I had a student who had a substitute teacher, and the substitute teacher was having some words with the class and said, "Do you think we're playing games here?" And my student responded, "We're not playing games," and promptly got in trouble because he wasn't picking up on the nonverbal cues that the teacher was frustrated. And of course, the teacher was misreading the intention of my student. Now, another one of my students said she's really good at recognizing when people are using figures of speech, but she doesn't understand them. And so she spends all day trying to keep them in her mind so she can go home and Google them. And imagine how much she's missing because of that. And another example of literal thinking is I've had two separate students who both believed that everything they saw on TV and movies were real. And they were about 13 by the time I discovered this. And so I had to sit them down and show them their favorite actors in character. So Patrick Stewart as Professor Xavier or Captain Picard. And I showed different examples. And I found behind the scenes footage of movies being filmed so they could see it's made up. There's many people working on these things. And the first student was very relieved because he thought he was surrounded by all these bloodthirsty people who were really enjoying seeing people die and get beat up in superhero movies. While the other student, I'm pretty sure for the next couple of weeks, was walking around like he was in the Truman Show, like, what else in my life isn't real? So for us, we should really focus on saying what we mean and meaning what we say. That's part of building trust with students so they know that we are predictable. And we can explain figures of speech as we use them, try to avoid humor that is unkind, sarcastic, difficult to grasp. And of course, never promise something you can't follow through with, because they will definitely hold you to it. And they might even remember the date that you said it. So they will know. All of this, of course, contributes to what I would think of as a near constant state of anxiety. And in fact, there was a study done, and there was one group of neurotypical people in the study and a group of autistic folks. And they were shown pictures. Some of the pictures were neutral stimuli, like an object you would find around the house. And other pictures were intentionally scary, like a shark with its mouth open. And both groups had a startled response to the scary stimuli. But the group of autistic people had the same startled response to every single stimuli. So is that prediction difficulties? They're anxious because they don't know what's coming next, or just higher baseline anxiety? Either way, it contributes to how they might be feeling in our classroom. And the artist who drew these pictures really felt under the microscope a fear of getting it wrong. And I think that's a common experience because too often we tell our students the things that they're doing wrong and the things they need to work on, and not the things that they are getting right. And it can make our students not want to try in the first place for fear of making a mistake. And in classrooms, anxiety is the nemesis of learning. So it's also important that we teach our whole class about emotions, discuss ways of handling emotions, prompt those breaks, have stretch breaks, especially this year. And like I mentioned before, mindfulness is a great way to move from co-regulation to self-regulation. And read alouds. Read alouds are a great way to talk about social emotional responses. And I would love if you posted in the chat some of the books that you've used with your students. So, because we all benefit from shared knowledge and good literature. Executive functioning challenges occur in students with autism and with ADHD. So that can mean difficulties with working memory, cognitive flexibility, and goal-oriented behaviors, impacting the ability to make a plan, to initiate that plan, and to sustain the work you need to do to complete that plan. And these challenges work together with sensory differences to mean our children have a lot of difficulty knowing what is important because they are noticing everything. So the implications for us is we need to draw their attention to what is important. Things like organizers, teaching processes like highlighting the main ideas and how to summarize. And on tests, it really helps if we tell them what to study. Other students can pick up on the hidden rule that what you focused more time on is probably the area on the test, but autistic students might not know, and they might spend hours and hours trying to memorize absolutely everything, increasing their cognitive workload significantly. So we can also help by breaking tasks down for them. So even cutting up worksheets and giving them a strip at a time, or giving them one paragraph of the essay they have to write is due tomorrow, and the next paragraph the next day, and just helping them to manage in small, manageable chunks. And when you are giving them feedback, it's also important that you draw attention to what you are talking about, even with praise. So I never say just good job. I will say, I really loved how you participated in class, or whatever it is I want to praise. Otherwise, they might be going, were they talking to me? What was I doing that was good? And of course, they process information differently. And this is true even of autistic students who have no diagnosed language or cognitive impairments. They may struggle with reading comprehension because when reading, they tend to process on a word-by-word basis rather than the sentence in context. So they can forget what they're reading and what it means. And they might have trouble with incredibly long or multi-step questions, vague questions, or questions that are requiring too much precision, like this one. I think a better question would have been for me to ask, what is one winter activity you enjoy? I can just imagine the student sitting there looking at that word favorite and being in like an existential crisis. What is my favorite recess game? Because again, they want to tell the exact truth. And other students would understand the hidden rule that, you know, this just is asking for one thing you really like. So when we word questions, we also want to be as unambiguous as possible to help reduce their cognitive load. And it's important to recognize that their brain is already doing so much more than their peers because they are cognitively processing all of the social information, all of the sensory stimuli, and then we're expecting them to learn the academics, which of course is delivered by a social person and in a social forum. So that is requiring many, many mental gymnastics for them. And of course, they do better with tasks that only use local processing rather than tasks requiring integration from different areas of the brain. So their brains are literally wired differently than their neurotypical peers. So we do have to adjust some of the ways that we do things. So when we design tests and worksheets, we want to make sure it's visually appealing, not too much on a page, so we don't overwhelm them. It's easy to read, and the wording is very, very clear what we are asking. And writing can often be laborious for them. So when we can, we want to reduce the writing requirement by having organizers fill in the blanks, true and false, and being willing to accept other formats at times. And checklists of steps for longer assignments are really good, better than a big paragraph describing what they're going to do, because they're more likely to miss something that way. And I had a really good reminder from a student recently about using visuals to support comprehension. One of my students came to my program last year and had played pool, the game of pool, for the first time. And we were trying to describe this game to other students. And so we described the green felt tabletop, the pockets in the corner, the differences in the balls. We even mimed a pool cube with the meter stick. And the next week, I brought in a mini billiard set to make that connection. And so everyone could play that game together. And one of the students said, "Oh, that's what you were talking about. I thought you were talking about a swimming pool. You really should have shown a picture, Miss Dymond." And they were right. I really should have shown a picture. So visuals and giving processing time when we're speaking will also be very helpful to them. Our students also have vivid imaginary worlds. And this is what we are competing with: video games, Ninja Turtles, pizza. And often they have areas of passion that they're very knowledgeable about, that they think about all of the time. So we have to be really interesting to compete with those things. And of course, we can increase motivation by incorporating their interests into the day. And that's a great way to harness their ability to focus, because they can focus on those things they are passionate about most of the time. And it's a way of building inroads with peers as well, and just making the day more relaxing and motivating. So working those things into different questions, redirecting them in a funny character voice. I know so many Pokemon jokes I can tell now, and that's a great way to build rapport, but also motivate them throughout the day. Make a Minecraft bulletin board, or just give them a spontaneous reward to recognize the effort they're putting in, and say, why don't you take 5 minutes to make some origami, provided they can actually make origami, or that will be very frustrating. Last year, when I was preparing for an in-service, I asked my students what they wished adults knew. And almost all of them said, "Don't yell." Because even if what you are trying to relay might be positive, like I observed a teacher saying, "Happy holidays, everyone," in one of my students' classes, and he turned around to me and said, "See, she's mean." The message may not be received because of those sensory issues. The loud voice can be scary, it can be painful, and it's unpredictable. So I'm always trying to think about the experiences of my students, how they may be feeling on edge from everything accumulating, until I'm finally going to make a request that exceeds their capacity at that moment. And it's made me start to think about my own reactions kind of like a seesaw. How I react can either fling them off into a complete meltdown or total shutdown, or I can bring them gently down. And so I've learned, I was not always great at this at the beginning, but I've definitely learned to stay calm, to be logical, and to use less language when a child is upset, because they won't be able to process what I'm saying. I'll just be like the Charlie Brown teacher voice. And so once they're calm, once I'm calm, that's the time to collaboratively problem solve what happened, what they wanted when they were upset, how we could get that next time in a way that is helpful to them and to everyone around them. I really love Dr. Ross Green's collaborative and proactive solutions. And I use that all the time in the classroom. Now, I didn't always know how to do this. I remember in my first permanent position, on one of the first days, a student shredded paper over my head. And then he would do things like I'd be trying to show a video on the smartboard, and he would run up and try and touch all the YouTube videos in the side panel. And the way the board is designed, you can't actually override it with the mouse at the computer. And it was so frustrating. And I just didn't know how to make that connection with him. And I would, every morning on my drive in, I would say a mantra to myself. And this is from Russell Barkley. Every child, the children who need love the most often ask for it in the most unloving ways. And I would try and have that patience that came with that statement. And I decided each morning I would sit down with him. We would do a calming activity together. We would draw class banners, or I would ask for his help setting up my computer, or I would let him walk 5 paces in front of me, and I would give him the keys to my classroom and ask him to open the door. So I was trying to find ways to build trust and build mutual respect. And there came a time where we clicked, and all of the behaviors that I found so challenging really decreased. And that taught me it's about more than consequences. It's about more than blaming. We should never blame the child, but we should consider under what circumstances they do well and under what circumstances they do not do so well. And then ask ourselves, how can I make this environment and my teaching more supportive of them for next time? And I tell all my students, every day is a clean slate for both of us.
About 5 minutes, Kara.
Great, because I'm about to wrap up anyways. So this is the last concept I wanted to talk about. We all want to belong. And this card was made by my students for my birthday last year. And this stayed up on my desk till the end of June. And I love it because every time I look at it, and I hope every time they noticed it, it reminded us of the closeness of our group and all the things that we learned together. And one of the students that I taught used to describe our classroom as like a puzzle where every piece fits. And I think we want that for all of the students in our classes. So it's become more and more apparent to me that we have to teach interdependence to our students. We want to really listen to them, seek their input, and find ways for them to see themselves reflected in the classroom. And I learned this quite early on when I had a student, again, in my first permanent position. I was having trouble connecting with him. And then one day I heard him talking to classmates that he really wanted to go rock climbing. And I thought, I wonder if I can do this. So I talked to admin, I talked to parents, I did some research, and I came back and I told the group in the next session, we were going to go rock climbing. And he looked up at me and he said, no one's ever listened to me before. And from that moment on, our relationship changed. And I started to think about how these students are micromanaged in so many ways. And it made me think students need not just to see themselves reflected, they need to feel their impact. So I ask my students for help all the time. Even if I don't really need it, I'll ask their advice for setting up the computer. I will explicitly connect any request I make to impact. So I won't just say, could you please hand this out? I will say, could you help me by handing this out? And then I thank them afterwards. And then I share what's going on in my own life. And when I was doing my PhD defense, I told my students, oh, this is a big thing for me. I'm feeling a bit nervous. And all of them had advice for me. I remember one student saying, Miss Dymond, drink herbal tea. And so I drank herbal tea. And when I came back the next time, I said, you know what? That helped me so much to feel prepared. Thank you. And something magical happens when children go from seeing themselves as the object of everyone else's help to people who have the agency to be able to help others. And we want them to know everyone needs help sometimes. No one is independent 100% of the time. And certainly in COVID times, I know my support systems have been a lifesaver for me. And we want students to have those connections to other people. And so their voices are so important. And this is a picture from that trip where we went rock climbing. And my last three takeaways, of course, are listen, learn, and love. And I love what I do every day. I hope you get to love what you do every day. And the book has many more ideas and strategies for you. And I would love to hear, it would really help me for planning PD in the future, what your takeaways are. What is one small change you might make, or something that was reaffirmed for you in this? I'd love to see that. Okay, Lionel.
That was great. Thank you so much, Kara. There's a couple questions coming in, but as folks are typing in there, I'm thinking you could maybe pass on some Pokemon jokes for us. Just kidding.
Pikachu on a bus. You Pokemon.
That's great. Just kind of while we're waiting here, and like I said, I'll monitor the chat for a moment or two. You had a one. It was mentioned the title of your book, but I'm kind of curious for you. How do you define the autism lens? Because you had in there, I think it was use your autism lens. And I'm assuming it's all the pieces and all my notes that are there, and it's kind of all those put together, or do you see it as something more specific and targeted?
Well, it's more about the idea that the grand irony of autism is we always say, or we always sort of hear that they can't take perspective. But so often it's the adults around them who have difficulty taking perspective of the child. And there's a brain-based reason why it's hard for them to consider others' perspectives. So we really should be the ones to make that effort and that overture. So it's about trying to always see from their perspective, and knowing too that there's not just one autism lens. Every one of our learners has different strengths, has different developing areas, and it's about getting to know that individual student.
Good. No, that's great. Good. Thank you. A couple comments coming in here. First one is someone as a primary student with autism who isn't talking yet. Where can I start? I know that's a really big question, but I'm not sure if there's maybe some sort of direction you can point them in, or some thoughts or your experiences on that.
Of course. So I also welcome the expertise of people in the chat if you want to share any ideas. I work with students who are a little bit older and who are verbal, but nonverbal does not mean non-thinking. So we have to recognize, always speak to the child, build that rapport. Like some of these core concepts are exactly the same, but you might want to reduce your language use a little bit. You want to use visuals and teach things slowly, teach step by step, have positive reinforcement, but that relationship piece is going to help you so much to accomplish what you want to accomplish and accomplish what they want to accomplish.
Yeah, great. Great. There's an interesting one as someone who's very new to this area. I mean, even today when you use the term neurotypical, I'd never heard that reference before, but that made sense to me what you were saying. And Shelley here was asking if you could speak to the language around saying student with autism or autistic student.
I use both interchangeably in the book, partly for variety as a writer, but there are strong feelings about this. I know, 12 years ago when I was going through teachers college, it was instilled in us to use person first language all the time because we want to see the person and not just the autism. But amongst the autism community, people refer to themselves as autistic because it shapes every aspect of their experience. So I used both, and I hope people see value in both of those perspectives. And I try to use autistic more often now, knowing that that's the preference. But it's also hardwired into me to use person first. Yeah. So, we grow as we go.
That is true. That is true. We learn all the time. So another one here from Courtney, a phys ed teacher, and trying to get them autistic students to participate more in class. And is there any ideas around how to engage them without modifying more? And I mean, when I'm going again through your list of sort of things, I mean, I think PE teachers naturally are loud sometimes, right? So even that must be a challenge. So any thoughts on that?
It's a good point, Lionel. I work with a wonderful child and youth worker, and she teaches our students gym, and they are so comfortable in her class, and she breaks things down from the very beginning. So she starts very simple activities where you just work on one skill at a time. So it might be keeping their minds in the group. So focusing and passing a ball first, calling each other's names so you know to catch. And then the next round would be trying to keep the order, and giving them time to practice and experience each of those skills that they need before you put them into the throes of a huge game where there's so much going on around. So she even practices things like having a child have to pass to a partner to take the shot. So they start to feel what it's like to be part of team success. So thinking through each of the discrete skills, giving them time to practice those skills, and gradually building on to the best of your ability. I know that as a PE teacher, you have other children in the class, but it does help everyone to do some of those drills. I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, no, I'd never even thought of that before. So all putting the pieces together, like, I was picking up, okay, I get all the pieces you have to be aware of. And I like sort of the plain language and being aware of that. But then all of a sudden, yeah, you get into something like a game.
Well, it's like driving a car. When you first drive a car, it's completely overwhelming, and it takes time to automatize all of those steps.
Yeah, it's the hidden rules, right?
Exactly.
There's another one from Andrea here that's an interesting question. That is, how do you manage as autistic students age and peers do not want to partner with them? I'm assuming it's an issue, but I'm also thinking as they become adolescents, all adolescents get like that, right? So I'm assuming it's even, is it more, are the kids more aware at that time of the issues, or does it kind of work itself out?
I have a couple of thoughts about this. So there are actually studies that show that children with autism and no language or cognitive impairments, even in inclusive settings, always feel on the outskirts of things and not fully included. And often their peers don't know to compensate for them in any way because, again, the invisible disability. So the things that they are so good at masks what the challenges really are, and they are misperceived by peers who think they're overly blunt or disinterested or whatever it is. I think it's really important, especially in the primary grades, to do a lot of that talking about how everyone has different strengths, everyone's working on different things, and even having like an expertise wall where students say, okay, Michelle is really good at math, so you can go to that person if you need help with math. And Jimmy is really good with language, and showing them it's okay to need help with things. And I talk a lot when I go into classes with parent permission. And sometimes I can do lessons on autism if they've agreed, but sometimes I just talk about the social sense, and that some people struggle with the social sense. And what would that look like? And what would that feel like? And I do a lot of interactive activities. And then we talk about, is it fair that some people know exactly what to do to fit in and some people don't? How can we support them? How can we give them friendly reminders instead of reminders out of frustration? Because they really don't know. And those conversations can be very helpful.
No, that's great. Is it, and this is just someone, again, as I said, as we're having this conversation, things you start to think about. I mean, it sounds like your classroom is very proactive and you're always learning, right? As you get to know the kids and you understand, all the things that you say and realize, oh, they weren't thinking that way, but they're not with you all the time, correct?
No. So
when they go back to the other class, are you helping that teacher as well? Like, so your job is multifaceted. Is that kind of?
It's really my dream job. 3 days a week I'm teaching. So I have a year 1 group, a year 2 group, and a year 3 group. And then the other days I have planning and I'm supporting teachers. So I go and visit the home schools. It looks a bit different this year because of, we can't have students coming to us. But my job is to support the student and support their families and their classroom teachers. And we all work together.
Wow. That's That's amazing. That sounds great. You made one comment there, and we're coming to the end of our time, and folks are dropping in lots of great ideas. And I may have missed a question or two in there. We can see if we can capture those and get those out to everyone when the recording comes out. But you just made no one. I don't think anyone's made a comment of it. But this new world that we're in right now. I guess I'm wondering, I mean, there must be new challenges that you've experienced with kids. If you're virtual, it just seems like everything that we talked about today, it's like, holy smokes, it's almost like it's not square one, but the challenges, what must be the cognitive load on the kids must be huge as they're trying to figure out, okay, what is going on here? Any just sort of as kind of a final thought? I know we have listen, learn, and love, but in a virtual world, is there any takeaways you've had in the last few months that you could pass on to us?
Well, I taught graduate students virtually in the summer, and I realized very quickly I couldn't do everything I did when I taught the class in person. I had to reduce the workload, and this is true for our children. It's so hard to sit in front of a screen. It's hard to have to do self-directed work asynchronously after the lessons are done and try and remember. Definitely having the instructions written down or with visuals helps to make it easier to process what they have to do, and not making it wordy. I mentioned that already. And sometimes just saying to a student, you know what, there are 10 math questions in this section, pick 5. If you can do it 5 times, I know you can do it 10 times. There are ways we can reduce, or say, you know what, it's okay to submit this in point form. Or do you want to make a comic strip to show your knowledge? So finding ways that they can access and show their knowledge in ways that benefit them and aren't too taxing for them.
That's great. Good. Well, thank you. I'm just going to say thanks to everyone and pass it over to you for some final words to bring us to a close here. But I've just been sort of, as we're talking, scan the chat, and there's been great feedback and some great ideas from the group. And I think they've acknowledged your request to share ideas and things that work for them. So, just on behalf of everyone here tonight, Kara, I'd just like to say thank you so much. That was an excellent presentation, and I believe that, and I'm just echoing the comments that came in the chat. Amazing work that you're doing, and those are pretty lucky kids to have you, and I suspect the parents think exactly the same as well. And it's really nice to have you here today to share those experiences. So maybe I'll let you leave us with sort of some final thoughts, and we'll say goodbye to everyone after that.
I just want to thank you all for being here, for being interested in this topic, because that shows me that this is what you want to do in your classrooms and how you want to support your students. So very appreciative. Get in touch anytime. I'm on social media now, so if you have questions, I'm always happy to come to the drawing board and bounce ideas back and forth.
That's great. Thank you, Karen. I'll also just put up for folks from Pembroke an offer. If you're interested in Kara's book, The Autism Lens, there is a code that's available that will give you $5 off on your next purchase. And that little blue box that says Visit Pembroke Publishers, if you click on that, that'll open up a new window for you as well. So you have that directly there. So thank you to everyone for joining us tonight. It was great to have everyone here, and we look forward to seeing you at our next session in a couple of weeks. Take care and have a good evening, everyone. Bye-bye.